My name is Samuel Hartman, and this happened on August 23rd, 1997. I was 37 years old at the time and was working as a truck driver and had at least 15 years traveling the rural highways of southern Missouri, hauling all kinds of loads of all kinds. At the time, he was hauling lumber from the Mark Twain National to a lumber yard in Shelbyville. It was a lonely and fairly demanding job, but the pay was decent, and it kept me moving, something I enjoyed, really. I remember that day very clearly because it was sweltering hot, the kind of heat that made the air shimmer and the sweat pour out in buckets. I had the windows open, hoping for a breeze, but the air seemed stagnant and heavy. That day I had been on the road since before dawn, trying to make progress before the heat became intolerable. My truck, a heavy 1961 Kenworth W900, roared along the narrow two-lane road, and the hum of the engine sounded like music in the inclement heat. At this point, I was considering stopping at the first rest station to take a breather when I suddenly noticed a car standing on the shoulder up ahead. It was a beat-up old Impala wrapped in a cloud of steam, and next to it was a man standing there waving his arms up and down, motioning for me to stop. Normally, I would have passed by. I had already heard many stories about trucker robberies or worse situations, but something about this man's attitude, which seemed desperate, made me stop. I don't know if it was the heat or simply the fact that I felt empathy for the poor guy, but what is certain is that I decided to slow down and stopped a few meters ahead. "Hey, buddy," he yelled as he got out of the truck. "Thanks for stopping. My car overheated and I'm stranded here. Can you help me?" The guy was about my age, maybe a little younger, with dark, messy hair. His shirt was soaked with sweat, his face was red as a tomato, and he had a very uneasy expression in his eyes. You could tell he was having a hard time. "The thing is, he's got water in the radiator, but it's all evaporated now." "I think there's a leak," she told me. I walked around to the front of his car to take a look. The radiator cap was off, and it was indeed completely dry. I had some water in the truck, so I went back to get it, but as I did, I noticed the man nervously looking around, scanning the road as if he was waiting for someone. "Where are you headed?" I asked him, trying to start a conversation. "Toward Shelbyville," he replied. "Just like you. My name's Jake, by the way." "Samuel," I replied, handing him the water bottle. "Let's see if we can get it started again," I then told him. We spent the next 20 minutes pouring water into the radiator and trying to get the car to start, but no luck. The engine wouldn't start, but to no avail, so I offered to drive it. He gratefully accepted, so I saw no problem with it. He seemed like a harmless guy, just someone who was having a bad day. Jake settled into the passenger seat of my truck, and we got back on the road. At first, he remained silent, looking out the window, but I thought he was just tired. After all, he had several hours in that inclement sun trying to start his car. But there was something strange about him. His hands were shaking, and he was constantly looking in the side mirror. That struck me as odd. "Are you in some kind of trouble or something?" I asked him, trying to sound casual. Jake looked at me with wide eyes. "Why do you say that?" "You seem nervous, that's all. If you're running from someone, I'd rather know." He sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "It's complicated. Not that I'm in trouble exactly, but there are some guys looking for me. I owe them money, kinda like loan sharks." I didn't insist on knowing more details. I'd seen enough in my years on the road to know when not to ask too many questions. We drove in silence for a while as the miles ticked by. I began to think that maybe I had made a mistake in picking this guy up. Finally, we came to a small restaurant on the outskirts of a town. "Are you hungry?" I asked. "Well, I could use some food," Jake replied with a relieved expression. We pulled into the restaurant parking lot and got out of the truck. The place was nearly empty, just a couple of locals sipping coffee at the counter. We sat in a corner and ordered fried chicken and fries. While we waited, he seemed to relax a bit, even managing to smile as the waitress brought our drinks. I thought maybe things were looking up, but just then the door to the restaurant burst open and 3 men walked in. These guys were big and rough, and looked very intimidating. At that moment, I turned to look at Jake, and noticed that his face had lost all color. I didn't need much more to know that these were the men I owed money to. "We have to go," he said in a whisper. But it was too late. The men had seen us and were now approaching. I could see the fear in Jake's eyes, and for an instant I considered that we should run, but where to? They would just follow us. I decided to try to handle the situation by talking. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," I said as they approached. "Can I help you with anything?" The larger of the two, a bald guy with a bunch of tattoos on his face, began to taunt me. "This is none of your business, trucker. We're here for him," he said, pointing a thumb at Jake. I tried to stand up straight to appear more imposing and said, "It may not be my business, but he's under my protection now. If you have a problem with him, you'll have a problem with me too." The guy with the tattoos let out a derisive laugh. "You've got guts, I'll give you that, but you're outnumbered and we're not leaving without him." At that moment, Jake grabbed my arm and pulled me back slightly. "Samuel, please, let's go," he said. But after what was said, I couldn't turn back, not with those men looking at me with expressions that said they were ready to tear me apart. I looked around the restaurant, hoping someone would intervene, but the locals suddenly seemed very interested in their plates and cups of coffee. "Okay," I said, turning away. "Take him away. But if you do anything to him, I assure you, things won't stay that way." The guy with the tattoos, who seemed to be the leader, gave a sly grin. "The trucker's got guts," he said as he grabbed Jake by the collar and dragged him outside. I followed the men, unclear what I was going to do, but knowing I couldn't let them take him. As soon as we were out the door, Jake broke free and ran, while the 3 men cursed and took off after him. I hesitated for a moment, but then ran after them. However, we didn't make much progress. Jake was agile, but those guys caught up with him at the edge of the parking lot and made him fall to the ground. It was at that moment when I saw the flash of something metallic in the tattooed man's hand. It was a knife. Without thinking twice, I charged at the guys, tackling the tattooed guy and making him fall on Jake. The other guy, a very tall one, turned towards me, waving the knife violently, and before I could react, I felt an intense pain in the side of my body. But with all the adrenaline I had in my veins, I ignored it and continued fighting. I managed to punch him in the jaw, and he staggered backwards. Jake, now on his feet and reflecting intense terror on his face, managed to land a kick to the tattooed man's stomach and knock him back a few steps. Then I yelled, "Run for the truck," and he did so immediately. I tried to follow him, but the pain in my side intensified. I looked down and saw bloodstains oozing out of my shirt. At that moment, the tattooed man was getting up, and I saw that he was heading towards Jake again. He had stopped to try to help me, but I yelled again for him to get in the truck. That's when he ran over there and jumped in. I turned around hoping to give them time, but the men were no longer interested in me. They just ignored me and ran back to their car, cursing and yelling. I watched them leave the parking lot and get lost down the street, and only then did I drop to the ground. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. The nurse explained that a couple of locals had found me and called an ambulance. I had a knife wound in my side, but it wasn't life-threatening, thankfully. I asked about Jake, but she didn't know anything. A few days later, the police came to see me. They had found Jake's body in a ditch a few miles from the restaurant. He had been stabbed several times. My truck had never left the parking lot. I guess Jake didn't know how to drive it, and he probably tried to run away from the guys, but he clearly didn't make it. The man who attacked us had disappeared without a trace, and the cops never tracked them down. In the days that followed, I recovered from my injury and went back to driving, but I never forgot Jake or the fear in his eyes. I picked him up because I thought I could help him, but in the end I could not. It's hard to live with the guilt of knowing that you did everything you could and still failed, but that's life, and there's nothing left to do but accept the designs of fate. This happened during a road trip that I had been planning to take with my wife for several months, but never in a million years would I have imagined the terrifying outcome of our little adventure. That night we had been driving for several hours on the lonely roads of Maine. It was just me, and the road ahead. The original idea was to get to a little coastal town on the south coast of the state called Kennebunkport, where we had booked an Airbnb for 5 days. A mini vacation we definitely deserved after several months of hard work. The road was still mostly straight, so I decided it was time to stop for a while and stretch out at an old gas station on the side of the road. I didn't think twice. It was the perfect time to recover energy. Besides, I was already feeling all the muscles numb. Upon entering, the first thing we noticed was that the place had a retro look to it, with a flashing neon sign above the entrance that clearly looked like something out of an 80s horror movie. Mia offered to go downstairs to buy a coffee, and I nodded because I needed something to keep me awake. Several minutes passed while I waited for her in the car, and I began to wonder what was taking so long. I could hardly believe there were so many people at the gas station, so I looked into the store and saw Mia standing at the entrance, completely motionless, staring at something I couldn't see from where I was. I quickly got out of the car and approached her, and when I got there I could clearly see what had left her paralyzed. A few meters away from her, there was a huge Rottweiler, the biggest one I had ever seen in my entire life. I would swear it was the size of a Great Dane. The intimidating animal was standing in front of Mia. It made no noise and didn't move, it just stared at her. It also had no collar and didn't look domestic at all. It was truly gigantic and terrifying. The guy inside the store looked at us in surprise, but he didn't do anything. He just stood there dumbfounded as he retreated to the back of the place as if he wanted to escape from the animal. I was terrified because, although I am a dog lover, I knew that Rottweilers can be quite aggressive with strangers. Besides, I didn't know if this dog had an owner or was running around wild, because around us there were miles of forest, and if so, it would be quite more dangerous. I shouted and waved my arms trying to scare the animal, but he didn't flinch. It only had eyes for Mia. She backed away, and the huge Rottweiler also took a step towards her. It didn't utter a sound, but the tension in the air was palpable. But for some reason, this animal didn't look normal. She could have sworn there was an almost human look about it. Seeing that this beast wouldn't take its eyes off her, Mia began to tremble, and her eyes reflected all the panic she felt. We knew we had to get out of there as fast as possible, so, without taking her eyes off the dog, she managed to get around it and ran towards the car, while I quickly followed, but now the animal had started to leave us. The strange thing about this is that I could only feel its heavy paws hitting the ground as it ran after us, but it didn't bark or growl. It didn't make a sound. This was something very strange, but I thought maybe he was mute because, believe it or not, there are mute dogs too. When Mia managed to get into the car, I quickly ran to the driver's seat with the intention of flying out of there. But just before I could do so, I felt a brutal blow to my side that threw me violently to the ground. In that instant, the air was knocked out of my lungs and my head hit the pavement hard. I looked up in astonishment and saw the huge Rottweiler ram the car with such force that it shook the entire vehicle. Mia started screaming from inside the car, and despite the horrible pain, with effort I managed to get up and open the door. As soon as I was inside, I stepped on the accelerator and the wheels skidded on the asphalt. The car started, and we drove away from the gas station very quickly, but we were still not safe from the Rottweiler. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the creature running after us. My heart was beating a mile a minute as I accelerated faster and faster. The dog wasn't far behind and seemed to be getting closer and closer. What the hell? How could it keep up with us? It didn't make sense what was happening. Was it a mutant dog or something? I accelerated the car more, exceeding 100 miles per hour, but the Rottweiler was still there behind us, defying all logic. It was impossible that an animal could run that fast, and the worst thing was that it didn't seem to tire. It ran with terrifying ease, as if it could keep up that pace forever. Mia and I were equally terrified and confused. What on earth were we experiencing? Suddenly, the dog turned sharply and disappeared around a sharp bend. For a moment, we were relieved. We had escaped, but that relief was short-lived. When we rounded the next corner, there it was again, standing in the middle of the road, blocking our path. This time it wasn't moving, just standing there, motionless like a very scary statue. I hit the brakes hard and the car stopped a few feet away from the creature. Mia gasped with wild eyes fixed on the Rottweiler staring at us. What chilled me was how, with a slow and deliberate movement, the dog stood on two legs, adopting an almost human posture. In that instant, we both knew in unison that this was no ordinary dog. Mia began to cry, trembling with fear. I wanted to say something to her, anything to calm her down, but I couldn't find the words. After all, I was panicking too. It was like being trapped in a horror movie. Suddenly, the creature got back on all fours and, without warning, charged at the car with full force. The impact shook the vehicle, and the windows rattled loudly. I felt the car shaking under the pressure, and I was almost certain we were going to roll over. I had to do something, but I was paralyzed with fear. That's when Mia pushed me out of the way, took my place, pressed the accelerator, and turned the steering wheel towards the Rottweiler, trying to run it over. The car lunged forward, but the animal nimbly jumped to the side, dodging the blow with ease. As we passed him, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw his figure disappearing into the darkness. Was he gone? I don't know, but at least I could no longer see him. We were both looking back, nervously searching for the beast, not realizing that the real danger was coming from in front of us. The collision was brutal. I barely saw the other car appear out of nowhere, invading our lane at full speed. It all happened in an instant, but that instant felt like an eternity. The car spun around a couple of times, my vision blurred, and I only heard a loud ringing in my ears. For a moment, I didn't know where I was or what had happened, and when I came to, I tried to move, but pain shot through me from head to toe. I looked beside me for Mia, but her seat was empty. Despair swept through me from head to toe as I realized what that meant. She didn't have her seatbelt on. With much effort, I unbuckled and crawled toward the door. I finally made it out of the car, and when I looked up, I saw Mia's body on the road, lifeless, surrounded by broken glass. At that moment, the world came crashing down on me. All I could do was cry desperately as I tried to get closer to her. Then I saw it. The huge Rottweiler was there, standing a few feet away from her, staring at her. The creature began to slowly approach Mia's body. I tried my best to get there first, but my legs were broken. I crawled with all my might, but it was useless. I was exhausted, beaten, and on the verge of collapse, but I couldn't let that beast take my wife. "Don't go near her," I shouted. The Rottweiler turned its head toward me for a moment, but didn't stop. It continued to walk slowly toward Mia, and when it reached her side, it bent down and grabbed her body by the neck, dragging itself into the darkness. I screamed, cried, and cursed, but none of it changed. I could only stand there, helpless, watching my wife disappear, until I finally collapsed. I woke up in a hospital days after the incident, surrounded by machines and doctors. The first thing I did was ask for Mia, but deep down I knew very well what the answer would be. She was dead, and I was still alive. Then the doctors and the police told me that a drunk driver's car had swerved into our lane, causing the accident. My wife had been thrown from the car by the force of the crash and had died instantly. The driver of the other car had also died, but when I mentioned what I had seen of the Rottweiler and everything that happened before and after the accident, the officers just ignored me. They thought I was talking nonsense because of the shock I had suffered. They told me that there was no trace of any dog at the scene and that it was impossible for anything like that to have happened. It was several months before I was able to walk again, so I spent quite a bit of time in bed, and during that time I was doing research about it. I knew what I had seen, and no one was going to convince me that I was hallucinating from the shock. That's how I came across the legend of the death hound on the internet in a paranormal story forum. In it, a man told about this dog being a kind of demonic spirit that is itself a harbinger of death. The legend of the Hound of Death. It is said that this is a supernatural animal, that when it appears to someone it is because this person is destined to die very soon and in a tragic way. The description given by the user and other people who wrote about it was that of a huge black dog that did not bark, which fit perfectly with the creature I saw that night. That's why the guy in the store hid. It's because he knew the legend of that Rottweiler. The dog didn't do anything to Mia, but it didn't help her either. It was just there as a message, as if it knew my wife was about to die and came over attracted by the smell of death on her. I'm still trying to process what happened. If she had known about that legend, could she have changed her fate? If we had turned around, would she have been saved? I guess no matter what, fate was written for Mia, and I feel like it was written for me too. I can't live without her, and I'm not sure if I'll be able to move on after this. The story I'm about to tell you happened to me a few months ago, when I was returning home at night after dropping my fiancée off at my mother-in-law's house. It was, without a doubt, one of the most terrifying experiences of my entire life, and definitely something that completely changed the way I see the world. It was an ordinary winter night, so the weather felt heavy and there were forecasts of thunderstorms. My mother-in-law was sick, and my girl had to go visit her in the neighboring city. So I drove there and dropped her off at her mother's house. I had to go to work the next day, so I couldn't stay. So now I had to go home alone, at night, and to top it off in the rain, as it had just started to rain. It was after 11 p.m., and the road was deserted. I also had to go through a forest that was on my way back home, and a few rural villages. It was already late, so I wanted to get there fast, but the rain and storm complicated things. I had had an exhausting day, and driving in those conditions was not easy at all. When I had been driving for an hour or so, I was passing through a small town on the way, when I suddenly saw a girl. She was young, maybe in her early 20s. She was dressed in red and standing on the side of the road all alone. She didn't try to stop me or anything, but being a good person, I felt I couldn't leave her there, especially since it's not common to see someone on that road at that hour, let alone in that weather. So I slowed down and pulled over next to her, rolled down the window, and asked her if she needed help. She was quiet for a moment and didn't seem to want to talk. The weather was starting to get worse, so I asked her again what she was doing so late in such a place. That's when she looked up and looked at me with a sad and tense expression. She walked over to me and said, "I'm sorry, sir, but could you help me?" I was coming back from my office, and the cab driver got mad at me and left me here alone in the woods. "I've been waiting for 40 minutes and no one has helped me. Could you take me home?" I felt sorry for her when I heard her story, so I told her to get in the car. She got in, and I immediately asked for her address and gave her my phone so she could dial her location. While driving, I asked her out of curiosity, "What are you doing so late in such a deserted place? These kinds of places are not safe for someone like you. You should be careful." I looked in the rearview mirror and saw her in the back seat, but she did not respond. She remained silent, looking out the window. I thought maybe she didn't hear me, so I repeated the question, but still, she ignored me. She was still staring blankly out of the car. I thought she must be upset about something, so I decided not to insist, but as I continued driving, I noticed that her mood seemed to have changed. She no longer looked tense. Now she seemed to enjoy the road. I thought that maybe her countenance of a moment ago was due to what had happened to her. After driving for about 20 minutes, we arrived at her house. She got out of the car and asked me to get my phone to call her parents, as the door might be locked, but she promised to return the phone as soon as her parents arrived to help her. The girl seemed a bit innocent, and I didn't sense that there was anything unusual, so I turned my phone on and left it at the door. A few minutes passed, and since it was already late, I asked her to please come quickly. She came in and I stood waiting, but after 10 minutes, nothing. I was looking at the door again and again, but she still didn't come back. It was already past 1 in the morning at that time, so I decided to go in and ask about my phone, because I was starting to get angry. She had promised me she would return it quickly, and it had already been about 20 minutes or half an hour and she didn't come back. Feeling annoyed already, I went to the door and knocked a little loudly. But suddenly, an old lady opened up, wielding a cane. She was very old, with completely white hair. I asked her to call her daughter or granddaughter because she had tricked me and kept my phone. The old lady replied that she didn't know what I was talking about, that she had no daughter or granddaughter at home, and that she lived alone. I thought maybe she was trying to hide the girl, so I pushed open the door, walked in and started calling her name. Suddenly, my eyes fell on a portrait on the wall and I was shocked. I couldn't believe my eyes. It was the portrait of the same girl I had left a while ago. The picture was hanging in the hallway and it was a huge image of her, surrounded by flowers and wearing the same dress she had been wearing when I picked her up at the side of the forest. I then went back to the old woman and asked her, half annoyed and in a sarcastic tone, who she was, the girl in the portrait, but I was really not prepared for her answer. The old woman answered me that the woman in the portrait was her daughter, who had died in a car accident at the age of 20 more than 15 years ago. I could not believe what I was hearing. In fact, at first I thought she was pulling my leg, but then she showed me a shelf that was in a corner, and when I saw what was there, I was completely frozen. Because in that space there was a photograph of her surrounded by flowers and candles. But next to it was a small wooden box with golden brooches that I immediately recognized as an urn, and the old woman told me that there were the ashes of her daughter, which she preferred to keep. Now there was no way to confuse her. It was the same girl. After a moment's thought, it all began to make sense, and I was completely stunned. I didn't know what to say. I was really scared and bewildered by the whole thing, so I just apologized to the old lady for disturbing her and went back to the car. I opened the door and saw that my phone was there, right in the back seat. I couldn't believe it. I had boarded a ghost in my car. As this realization dawned on me, my body started to shake, and I had to take a few minutes to calm down. Then I picked up my phone, started the car, and got out of the place as fast as I could. When I got home, I was thinking about it all night. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't. That incident shook me to my bones, and I still couldn't believe what had happened. I didn't know if it was a miracle or something paranormal, but it was definitely the scariest moment of my life. This all happened when I was 18 years old on a road trip from my hometown to my new college. I had all my stuff stuffed in the trunk and back seat of my cheap SUV. This was not only my first long road adventure alone, but it would also be the first time I would be away from my family for an extended period of time, so I was pretty nervous. The directions said it was about 500 miles total, which I divided into 2 days of driving. I took whatever route the map suggested, and it was estimated that I would arrive at the hotel around 10 p.m. But with stops for gas, traffic, eating, and all that, I knew I would be much later. By 7 o'clock, the sun had completely set and most of the cars had disappeared as well. Occasionally, I would pass one and see its light slowly fading in front of me, but much of the trip was alone. This left me quite tired and bored. Around 10 o'clock, I decided to stop at the next gas station before making the final leg of the trip. A few minutes later, I left the highway and pulled into a gas station. Up to that point, I hadn't seen a town or anything like it the whole way. It was just a gas station with some pumps and a small convenience store. There were no other cars on the road or in the parking lot, no house lights or buildings in sight, nothing like that. I pulled up to a pump and got out to start filling up, and as I looked around, I almost had a heart attack when an older guy approached me. He was probably in his late 60s and honestly looked like a bum. I wasn't expecting someone to come up here, and his short smile didn't give me much reassurance. "Hello, do you need anything?" I asked, hoping he wouldn't come any closer. The guy stopped a few feet from my car and looked around as if in stealth mode before replying, "Take the exit back to the freeway." I looked at him confused, not quite understanding what he was saying. He pointed behind me, toward the exit where he came from, and repeated, "Take the exit back to the freeway." After a second, I just said okay, and the man left, but I still didn't understand. The exit he had taken earlier and wanted me to take again was a one-way road, so his logic made no sense at all. He wanted me to drive on the wrong side and make a U-turn to go back, but that wouldn't work. I looked down the driveway, the road I was supposed to take, and there were no construction signs or anything blocking it. It was just an empty ramp back to the highway. As I put the pump back and walked back to my car, I looked at the guy who was now sitting against the wall of the convenience store. The more I thought about it, the weirder the guy seemed to me, just sitting there talking nonsense. I started to think that maybe this was some sort of trap, so I followed my instinct and left the parking lot toward the freeway entrance. As I pulled in, I noticed that almost all the lights on the road were out. I slowed down, figuring maybe it was a construction zone or something. Keeping my eyes on the road in front of me, I tried to keep an eye out for anything odd that might appear on the road. Suddenly, I barely saw the shadow of a figure to my left, before 2 pickup trucks appeared out of nowhere and stopped right in front of my car. This obviously forced me to stop, but then the most terrifying scene I have ever witnessed in my life unfolded in front of my eyes. Suddenly, all the van doors opened, and a bunch of guys jumped out of them and started running towards me with an arsenal of bladed weapons of all kinds: machetes, metal bats, knives, field tools. You name it. These guys started yelling things at me that I couldn't understand, but they seemed very angry for some reason. I started backing up quickly, feeling the panic run through my body. But the men kept running towards my direction, and at one point they got dangerously close to my car windows. So I sank my foot on the gas, and when I felt I was already at a safe distance, I suddenly saw a bunch of people coming out of the shadows on the side of the road. Some even tried to run after my car to block my path as I turned around. Frantic to get out of there as soon as possible, I accelerated with all the power of my old SUV, and when I was a safe distance away, I called 911 as soon as I thought I was safe. But for some reason, they never answered. They gave me no update, as if they hadn't even screened the call. Ironically, it was the weird old guy at the gas station who tried to keep me from getting caught in that mess, or so I thought. Anyway, I was very lucky to get out alive. I have no idea what that group was, or what they were planning to do. I was driving a truck to a company in the western part of the country coming from the East Coast. I've taken this route a bunch of times in my nearly 20 years as a truck driver. It's always the same roads, the same truck stops. It's the same over these 2 decades. However, I've never had anything like this happen to me. Although I've had a few weird moments, nothing compared to this. So when I took the road again, I had no worries. It was just another day at work. About 20 hours after I started, a thunderstorm began to form. As I was driving, I slowed down because it was already late and I was looking for the next truck stop to rest. Suddenly, a very bright light appeared behind me. The road I was driving on was flat and straight, so I should have seen those guys coming in my mirror. In the early 2000s, when I was in college, I worked nights delivering pizzas for one of those big chains. I had done something similar when I was younger and attended my local community college. Whenever I needed quick cash, that was my option. Despite all the stories I heard about how dangerous it could be, I never had a real problem with a thief or anything like that. I guess in its day it could be a bit risky, but by the time I started, companies had already learned that adjusting practices like putting a $20 limit on drivers, that went a long way toward reducing theft. But while I never got robbed, I did have a couple of creepy situations that could make for a couple of short stories. The scariest one happened to me in 2003. I knew the city I lived in well at the time. I moved there after high school and had been there for several years. In those 5 or 6 years, I became familiar with almost every area, but that night I got a call to deliver a pizza to an address that neither I nor any of the other drivers knew. When the order came in, I went to the map to look for it, but it was nowhere to be found. Even the GPS wouldn't show it to me, and at the time we had no delivery area. So despite my reservations, I decided to go. Theoretically, the place should be there if the road went on for 10 more blocks. So I turned down that street a block before it ended and continued south. Eventually, I saw that along that new and newly paved road should have been the end of the previous one. For what seemed like miles, I continued along that road. There was nothing on either side, and I didn't pass another car the entire time. I couldn't believe that the state had managed to build that road without a single rumor reaching the media. After 5 years of driving around town, I had no idea this part existed. I was like an ancient-style explorer discovering the sources of the Nile. I was excited to see it all. But at the same time, that deserted road out of nowhere sent a chill down my spine. It was a good 10 minutes before the house I was looking for appeared in the distance. I didn't understand why anyone would want to build a house there, in the middle of nowhere, with no clear way to get there. As I approached, I noticed that the house must be at least 50 years old and probably had never been repaired. All around, everything looked desolate, and for a moment I thought the house was empty, but I saw the front door wide open. Behind an old broken screen, everything seemed to be in its place. So I grabbed the pizza and headed for the entrance. I knocked on the screen door, but got no answer. Then I saw what appeared to be a young woman moving about in the kitchen. I knocked again and heard a female voice tell me to come in. Despite my misgivings, I decided to go in and waited in the small lobby. From the beginning, other drivers had warned me never to enter houses I didn't know. But since there was nothing to make me nervous, I thought the woman would soon come out to pay me. Just then, however, I heard a man whisper from the kitchen, calling out to her. That was enough to make me run out of there like I was being chased by crocodiles. I was so scared that I got back to the restaurant in half the time it took me to get to that house. When I told my boss what had happened, he decided to call the police. I was so nervous with all the adrenaline that my boss sent me home for the day. A few hours later, my phone rang. The police had news about what they had found. It turns out that whoever was there was gone, although the house had probably been abandoned for quite a while. They found evidence that someone had been inside recently, as there were cigarettes on the floor and traces of other illegal substances. What was interesting about this was that they were also given information about where that road came from and why the house was the only building in the middle of nowhere. The state had been trying for 20 years to buy the land from that house and the new section of road, but the owner did not want to sell. After several attempts, a judge blocked the sale a couple of years before the owner died, and his children finally sold the land to the state. They were so excited to get the land after so long that they started building the road right away. Although it wasn't officially open, the locals were already using it. I was glad to know that, but I still wondered how those two people knew about the empty house in the middle of nowhere. The police had no idea. We could only assume they drove by and thought it would be a good place to ambush a delivery guy. In the end, even $20 is a good profit if you are desperate. The officer commented to me from experience that people have killed for much less. The best part was that the county planned to demolish the old house next week, so there would be no more problems with other drivers. 2 days later, I was driving down the new road, which was serving as a shortcut through town, and I saw the house being torn down. It was like a weight being lifted off my shoulders before my eyes. I decided that I would never again go into a customer's home or make deliveries in areas I didn't know well. Maybe in the future, I will share another story, although not as intense, as I have enough to tell from my time as a delivery driver, and several of these experiences have their dose of fear. This happened in 2014. Back then I was a veteran tow truck driver. I've been towing cars most of my adult life and will probably continue to do so until I retire or die, whichever comes first. At the time, I was working for a very small towing company with only 3 employees, so we took turns working and were on call every weekend. This was my summer shift weekend, a time when people were out quite a bit, which meant I was busy dealing with accidents and towing broken cars all over town and on the freeway. The truth is, I liked being busy, plus I was getting paid on commission, so the more calls I handled, the more money I made. Now, that day was Saturday night, almost Sunday morning, and it was around 1:30 or 2 a.m. I had been very busy. As I said, I had been very busy, tired and a little cranky. I just wanted to go home and get a few hours of sleep before resuming my shift on Sunday. Then my phone rings, and it was an insurance company asking if we could tow a car for one of their clients that had broken down on the side of the road, and the accident site was about 15 miles out of town. Normally, I wouldn't have taken that call, but the destination of the tow turned out to be a dealership that was a couple of minutes from my house. So, although I thought about declining the call, in the end I decided, what the heck, I can go, pick up the car, drop it off near my house, and then go back to sleep for a couple of hours. So I replied that I could, and hit the road. It didn't cost me too much after all. The insurance company gave me the name of a client, which we'll call Lila to respect her privacy. They also gave me her phone number so I could get in touch with her. I usually try to warn people who are stranded on the side of the road, telling them I am on my way and giving them an ETA. I tried calling her a couple of times, but she didn't answer. It's not uncommon for people not to answer sometimes. After a while, I finally arrived at the right place. The emergency lights were flashing on the road, so I turned on the strobe lights and started to slow down as I got closer. I realized that not only was I looking for a new car, but there was another one on the scene that didn't have the emergency lights on, but was parked right in front of the car I was supposed to tow. That was a bummer, because I needed to get in front of the car so I could get it on the tow truck, and if this guy or whoever had any sense, he would know that he should park there if a tow truck was on its way. But sometimes people just don't realize that. Then, I saw a man and a woman near the trunk of the new car. The woman, she would probably be in her early 20s, was pretty dressed up for going out, in tight leather pants and a sleeveless top. her hair long and black. The guy looked tall and thin, dressed in a dark sweatshirt and dirty jeans. They were close against each other, her with her arms crossed, and him leaning toward her talking. I got off the crane and walked over. I introduced myself and they separated a little. I looked at the girl and asked, "Are you Lila?" She nodded and I told her I was coming from her insurance company, asking what was wrong with her car. Suddenly the guy interjected, "Yeah, it's just some fuel problems, it's easy to solve. Can you take it to this nearby parking lot? I'll take care of repairing it there." That bothered me a bit, because the parking lot he mentioned was further down the highway and already 15 miles out of town. I only took this call because I wanted to get back to my apartment. I really wanted to go home. Besides, if I changed the destination of the tow, I would have to call the insurance company again, wait for a representative and explain the change to them, trying to get paid more for the return miles after unloading. I didn't want to do any of that. And, to top it off, it was late. I'm not a mechanic and know nothing about it. But being that the car was relatively new, any problems it had were probably covered under warranty, so the dealership really was the best place to take it. I explained all this to the guy, but he didn't take it well. He got serious and said something like, "Look, just take the car where I tell you to take it and stop hassling." Just like that, in less than a minute, the guy is getting pissed off. This rubbed me the wrong way, and the truth is that he was making me upset too, so I said, "Hey, who's the insurer here, isn't it her?" The simple way to resolve is to ask Lila what she wants to do with her car, and whatever she says, that's what I'll do, not what you say. So fingers crossed that she wants me to take it to the dealership so I can go home sooner. I turn to look at her and ask, but to my surprise, she is no longer where she was a minute ago. I search for him with my eyes and almost turn around completely, only to find her standing right behind me an inch away with her arms crossed in a way as if she was hugging her own body and kind of hiding behind me. At that moment I looked into her eyes and honestly, it felt very strange. It was as if her gaze pierced my soul. It was evident that she was terrified. Then a new reality revealed itself in my head, and she didn't need to say anything else. I was silent for a few seconds, and I do a kind of double take, that is. I look at the boy, then at Lila, and again at him. Now I was sure I was not wrong. I ask Lila, "Do you know this guy?" She shakes her head slightly without saying a parable, and that panicked expression on her face is something I will always remember. That's when I turn to the guy and say, "You need to get the hell out of here right now, man." Although I'm not an aggressive guy, I'm rather quiet and like to avoid trouble. But I'm tall and have a pretty stocky build, so I can be intimidating when I want to be, and I think that may have played in my favor in what happened next. Without saying anything, the guy started moving towards Lila as if trying to intimidate her, so I got in the way. He tried to push me, but it seems he underestimated my weight, so he only managed to make me take a step back. But I quickly recovered and pushed him with all my strength, knocking him completely over and making him fall on his butt on the asphalt. Lila was now next to me, a bit between us, as the guy tried to get up. I grabbed Lila by the waist and turned her towards me crane, yelling at her to get in from the driver's side. She quickly does so. Then I turn to the guy who is already on his feet again, breathing hard. He comes over to me and stands there, just breathing hard in front of me, but doesn't do anything else. I look him in the face, trying to bring out my best voice of authority and blurt out that he needs to get the hell out. On the outside, I tried to look as tough as I could, but I was shaking with fear, because I didn't know if the guy had a gun, if he's going to try to fight, or what would happen if he did. I've said it before, I'm not a tough guy, I've never fought in my life. What if he hurts me? What if he stabs me? All of this is running through my head like lightning. My thoughts are racing, but in reality it's only been about 15 seconds, which feels like an eternity. But at that moment I remembered I had a box cutter in my back pants pocket, with which I uncovered the box of some accessories I had bought from the tow truck earlier that day, and instinctively I brought my hand to that spot to make sure it was still there. But apparently the guy caught this gesture and most likely thought I had a gun or something, because I noticed he looked cautiously and took 2 steps back, then just let out a heavy breath, smiled one of those creepy smiles, and started backing away, sucking his teeth and shaking his hands at the side of his body. He walked away toward the car. Meanwhile, I was still with my hand in the back of my pants, looking at him in the most intimidating way I could, but with my heart pounding, knowing that there was a chance that he did have a gun in the car and could use it against me. So I was very vigilant and gnawing with fear for those few seconds. However, he just got in the car and drove off. I continued to stand there, watching him until his taillights disappeared. Only after that did I breathe again. I loaded Lila's car into the tow truck, and as we drove to the dealership, she tearfully told me that her car went out while she was driving and she had to pull over on the shoulder. She called her parents because she had insurance. They contacted the insurance company, who finally sent me to help her. Right after she made the call, the guy showed up, came to her window, and asked her if she needed help, to which she replied that she was fine and a tow truck was coming. But he wouldn't give up, and in the end, she tried to close the window, but he reached in and opened the door for her. She, scared out of her mind, got out of the car and stayed in the back to be away from the traffic. But then the guy became aggressive with her and wouldn't let her in the car, and a few minutes later, I arrived. Who knows what would have happened if I hadn't arrived just then. When we arrived at the dealership, her parents were there waiting. Lila told them what had happened, and they gave me an extra $50 tip, which was all the cash they had at the time. Lila gave me a big hug, a sincere one, and then I left. I never saw her again after that. It's funny because I'm a traditional, somewhat old-fashioned guy, and in a way I always dreamed of this. That is, of being the hero who comes to the rescue of a pretty girl in trouble. I imagined it would be like being the knight who defeats the dragon, saves the girl, and then emerges triumphant as if he were the king. But the truth is that it didn't feel like that at all. Being in that situation was one of the scariest moments of my life. Those seconds when I didn't know if this man would pull out a gun and unload it on me were just chilling. Instead of a hero, I felt like a scared kid running into a bully at recess for the first time. If I ever find myself in a situation like that again, I won't hesitate to intervene. But I really hope I don't have to thank you again for getting out alive.